these questions have become more and more complicated, in particular, since people are talking about stuff like machine learning, right? And those who have followed machine learning tutorial know what I'm talking about here. Where, for example, it's really hard to know. So what's the algorithm, right? What is that even? If you actually generate a classifier by showing the machine, kind of this is like a tweet that belongs to this category. It's actually the machine itself or the algorithm that's looking for the factors. So questions like transparency and accountability are really hard to deal with if you have such a complex setting. So what we've seen is scholars kind of approach these questions either empirically or conceptually, right? Conceptually would mean, for example, you look into the histories of these algorithms. That's the work that I do, kind of try and better understand those techniques, think about them. But of course, there are also now empirical approaches to better understand. So, okay, how are platforms, mediating search and recommendation? I don't want to go too far into the conceptual part. But I think you're probably more interested in the empirical approaches. So that's, for example, a project that was recently started by Jörg Chasselot, who used to work for YouTube, and this website is called Algo Transparency. And what he does is he captures regularly. He has like a starting point. He has about 1,000 channels, and the moment a channel posts a new video, he's going to look at what are the recommended videos that appear, and then he basically creates a daily hierarchical list of the most recommended videos on YouTube. So that doesn't get us into like the algorithm. It's not reverse engineering, although that could be an outcome, but it's already kind of making the work visible. And colleagues and I, we've done a similar work, but not for the recommendation part of YouTube, but for the search part. So we've bombarded basically YouTube with a small selection of search queries every day for 7 weeks. Actually, I've never stopped it, so it continues to do that as long as the computer is turned on. And this is, for example, the page, the results page for Syria. First video, second video, third video, and so forth, right? And this is, of course, one way how people access content, right? People use YouTube constantly as a search engine. YouTube itself used to talk about ranking, right? But that was taken offline. And nowadays we don't know, all that much how that stuff works. So we've been interested in that question, and we've been using a tool that I developed like 3 years ago. That you can also use. YouTube data tools gets you a lot of data out of YouTube, and we said, okay, so how can we analyze the data that we've captured? So imagine we have a search query, we have a results list basically, and we have that for every day over 7 weeks, and then you can use something like this, a tool like this, to actually, it's called rank flow, to actually visualize, so that was the top video on this day, still the top video here, got a bit more views, so it got bigger, but here it's on the second place, and so forth, right? We can also quantify change using a change metric, and then we come, to something like this, where we actually compared 3 different queries, right? So here on the top we've got Gamergate, which at the time was already a bit of a stale controversy. And you see, there's not that much change. There is some change, right? Then we had Syria, and that was indeed quite interesting, because that was kind of, I think, possibly our main finding. So in something like this, we aren't able to find the factors. Right? We're not able to say, it's like watch time plus views. That's really beyond us. But what we're able is, for example, to say, hey, in something like Syria, there are periods of stability, right, but relatively little changes, and then there are what we call newsy periods, where everything changes, interestingly. And then actually, you can see, for example, this video here, it's always here, right, like at the eighth rank. It's got a lot of views. During this newsy period, it completely disappears, and then it comes back, right? And this down here was then Trump, right? And that was really in summer 2016, like changed all the time. There was no video that was in the top 10 for more days than 4, right? So those were kind of this identification of kind of stable periods, music periods. We also try to then actually, and this is maybe where we start moving away from the algorithm. We really try to see what is being ranked. So not just this idea. Okay, there are there's some changes, and we can look at this graphically. But what actually appears, right? And we started describing the videos we were finding behind the search queries, and we found on the one side some a strong presence of native YouTube content. Sometimes particularly in agitated periods, when in music periods, smaller channels made it to the top. But then we also found different forms of kind of platform vernacular, but also issue vernacular. We found that each one of those queries actually had quite a different, kind of patterns to them. We were able to make some, correlations between. So this basically shows over a couple of days change metric. So how changey are our rankings? Search volume. So you can get that from Google Trends. How many people are searching for something, and videos published that correspond to that query. And those three things, they actually, correspond quite well. And when more people search, there's more change. But causality is in this case really kind of beyond us. So this is where we really kind of start. Okay, we have to, in order to kind of understand what the algorithm does, we have to move beyond the algorithm, right? That, I think, was the main kind of outcome of that, and it's also the starting point for kind of this 6-layer diagram that I want to make here. So we've used that term, ranking cultures, to address that, right? To address this idea that algorithmic work is a distributed accomplishment that includes, all of those different groups as signals, but also as content creators. And kind of the first level that maybe one really has to pay more attention to is that, as Ian Bogost says, concepts like algorithm have become like sloppy shorthands, slang terms for the act of mistaking multi-part complex systems for simple singularities. Something like YouTube has a lot of different aspects to it, even if you stay on a technical level, right? There are interfaces, there are forms and functions, a lot of them, they constantly change, right? And they are part of what produces outcomes. There are now increasingly methods, for example, Light et al. Proposed the walkthrough method, a more structured way of looking at interfaces. Looking at interfaces, how they what's happening, how can you identify elements, how can you talk about forms and functions in a more structured way. At Diana Bucher's work, for example, she's been looking at how Facebook formalizes friendship, right, and thereby structures the act of living friendship. So she says basically that friendship is encoded, assembled, and organized, right? So that's already kind of moving from the interface elements, maybe on a bit of a higher level. That Ager's term, grammars of action, I think captures that. And then, of course, we could go into the data flows in the back end. We could look at the metrics. How are metrics being constituted? What is their role in the interface? What do they project to us? So there's this huge space. So when you start talking about YouTube, actually, you get into many different elements here. Because, of course, this interaction between those parties is largely mediated by interfaces. The content creators interact with YouTube through interfaces. The advertisers use interfaces. They don't call YouTube, right? There's an advertiser interface. All of this goes through kind of constructed pieces of software. And that constantly changes. I mean, for example, YouTube has, some time ago, right, it has introduced a live chat. So there used to be just the comment section, and now there is live chat. And one could really ask, maybe more conceptually, what kind of communicative setting is being constructed. It's one of my favorite articles from Michael Schutzen. where he argues, that democratic conversation is not just, talking, with each other in a non-formalized way, but he argues that democratic conversation is highly formalized. And through that perspective, one could say, so what kind of formalization do interfaces imply? Last week, Facebook introduced petitions, right? It's a new kind of sucking up new forms. That's the creator side. So it's one of the reasons that I actually make YouTube videos, is so that I get access to those interfaces. I'm interested in those interfaces. It's what Webster calls market information regimes, right? If you're a content creator, you get like, how are my videos doing? How are other videos doing? When are people stopping watching, For example, there seems to be like, and particularly boring around, what is this, it's maybe, I don't know, but somewhere in that video, like I'm losing a lot of viewers, right? So you basically, the interfaces are not just interactions, but there's a lot of information coming back, right? And the content creators, they use that a lot, obviously, to optimize their practices. But maybe more interestingly for kind of this group here is, so we had the algorithms, right? The interfaces, the forms, the infrastructures, and so forth. But then all of that is obviously inhabited by, well, a lot of people, right? Participants, they have their practices, they have their contents, and there are all kinds of relations between them. And of course, these elements, they enter into contact with the algorithm and the infrastructures, and that's appropriation. Users make those things their own, right? And we have quite a number of ethnographic studies these days, but what we're really missing, and that's not just for YouTube, is like an appreciation of all of this, what I've called here, YouTube on the whole. What can we say about practices? What do we actually know about what people are doing in those molds that the platforms provide to them? Bertel, for example, has recently tried to do a representative sample of YouTube, and it's one of the first attempts to really characterize the whole platform. And like one of the things he found is, again, the classic Matthew effect. Bigger channels get bigger, and so forth, right? Stuff like this. And indeed, I mean, if we look at those participants, and in the beginning I said, oh, social media, it's all very nice, right? But we are really in a phase of consolidation where we have like very large channels that, they are here to stay, right? They make a lot of money and so forth, right? So what used to be called participatory culture is nowadays a very hybrid culture between amateurs and increasingly all kinds of professionals. Some of them, of course, being supported by multi-channel networks that kind of play a role as mediators between advertisers and content creators, also between content creators and the platform. And these multi-channel networks can make stuff even more complicated, right? I would say that on YouTube, in any case, the obvious object to study is the channel. It's really that the channel, I think, is the natively digital object, as Richard calls it, that I think forms the core of YouTube's organization, right? Of this kind of techno-institutional form of governance. I think it's a channel that really renders what's on offer kind of readable and navigatable, particularly because it has this subscription logic. So certainly we have search, we have recommendation, but I would say kind of that the most important element is probably the channel, and we can ask the question, who's on YouTube? Why are they on YouTube? What are they doing there? Which themes or issues dominate, right? And that's really kind of that intersection, maybe between a more general trying to create a platform picture, and then kind of thinking about particular topics and subtopics and how they connect and so forth, like issue research, right? Of course, we can come back to the role of algorithms in all of that, but audience selection, I mean, it's kind of a classic concept, right? That of course there is recommendation, of course there are results, but people watch, right? They click, they do things. Why? How? Can we study that? It's not so clear, right? And this, of course, leads them to the question: so who will reign, that new ecology, other than the platform? And what we can indeed see is, kind of the emergence of all kinds of hierarchies. That's the top 10 according to Social Blade of the channels that have the most viewed videos, right? So at least in this battle, for those who have observed the PewDiePie versus T-Series battle, in this battle, T-Series, it's got about 3 times as much as our friend PewDiePie. So how can we study all of this? I mean, we can ask a lot of questions. Of course, what we often do in digital methods research is we try to, kind of look at the interfaces. That's also why I'm highlighting that, and then see, what kind of data can we gather from that to start, start making descriptions. So here you have a YouTube channel. It's a YouTube channel called ContraPoints. If you don't know that channel, it's the best channel on YouTube. Just say, right? So heard it here first. And here you can see, the related channels on the side, right? And it's one way that YouTube mediates connections between channels. There are actually different types. So channels can feature other channels. Channels can subscribe on other channels, and that's the channels themselves doing that. But the related channels, they are generated. They are generated by YouTube through co-subscription patterns. So you could say, people who are subscribed to these channels also are subscribed to these channels, right? And in the digital methods approach, what we would do, is simply say, hey, let's crawl that, right? And then see what we can do with that information. So here I started from two YouTube channels, American Political, Rubin Report, right wing, Young Turks, left wing, and then crawled 3 steps into the network, and we can indeed kind of see, certain clusters emerge. And that's one way of saying, hey, we're actually using the interface part. We're using, in this case, the algorithm part to get, to the population, the participants, the practices, right? And this is an approach that we actually really would like to enhance. So we've recently written a proposal, a research proposal in Spanish, where we suggest to map all of YouTube. So we want to map all of YouTube. Start with Social Blades, top lists for channels, and then just crawl everything. But of course, not just to map it, but to think like, what kind of descriptors can we generate? So 2 things that we're very interested in is things like, can we describe more controversial zones? Which parts of YouTube are more controversial, right? Dislike ratio, maybe, right? Which channels can we create metrics like a fidelity metric? I'm very interested in that. Imagine you have 2 channels. One has a lot of subscribers, but not that many individual videos don't have that many views, right? And that's actually quite true for a lot of big channels. They have a lot of subscribers, but their videos don't have that many views. And then you have maybe a smaller channel, but the videos have a lot of views. And you can see that being a pattern, particularly in the extreme right. Those are not huge channels, but the audience they have watches every video the moment it comes out. And that may actually really inform their very high ranking in many of those recommendation and search fields. So can we make these kind of comparisons? Can we start mapping things and describing things? What's out there? Who's dominating? What are they talking about? 4th level, and now I think each level is getting shorter and shorter. I think it's the business model. It's just really important. We're nowadays talking about fake news. It's very understandable. Yeah, so we're talking about fake news as something that's like, it's also politically charged, right? But 2 years ago, how people were talking about it was that people were making money, right? There was a big article in the New York Times about like a couple in Moldova making, fake news for conservative audiences, and they had like no political intentionality whatsoever, right? They just want to make money, right? Through ads, right? So keeping the business model in mind, I think, is really important. We could, of course, we still have the classic advertisement model with keyword bidding, but you're really seeing, and I think it again makes sense to take a step back, and we're, for example, seeing that YouTube treats channels of different size quite differently. So what I've said before, that everybody interacts with the platform through interfaces. Well, if your channel has more than 100,000 subscribers, you can call somebody actually, right? So that's the creator and that's the cool YouTube guy, right? You suddenly get human contact, right? So there's all kinds of modulations built into channel sizes. Again, coming back to ContraPoints, right? Very interesting. Here the link become a Patreon. That's become a really important business component for a lot of these channels. So that's ContraPoints' Patreon page. And you can see she has 7,000 patrons, and they pay at least $2 per month or more, right? So I'm a PhD dropout. I'm not making suggestions, but that's a pretty good salary. That's at least $14,000 every month, right? So Patreon has been a really important element, and we're thinking in our mapping, can we look for the Patreon link while we crawl the channels, right? So trying to describe a bit like the monetary earnings, of course, like very roughly. And of course, that has changed a lot. I mean, YouTube now proposes a paid service, YouTube Premium and YouTube Music. YouTube is actually moving the Patreon model into their own platform. For the moment, it's US only, but that feature, Join, right, that will allow you to pay $2 or as much as you want per month. So it's actually sucking up the Patreon stuff. Shopping, right? You can now, there's now a shop function integrated into YouTube. So the question is, like, could we enrich something like this with all of those metrics? So thinking about the business models may actually give us very interesting perspectives to further distinguish the channels, right, and talk about that. So kind of if we go back to that, monetization, we get a kind of a bit of a more complicated, with the multi-channel networks in there, forms of direct monetization, not just the ads, right? But kind of thinking about how this informs our empirical research. 5, policies and values, real quick. There's of course all kinds of justification discourses, and I don't want to bore you with economic theory, but in the case of YouTube, and I think beyond, what we can really see is that things have really changed, right? So when we talk about kind of policies and values, maybe not the right term, I'm thinking about kind of this really quick shift from basically, hey, we're not curating anything, right? We are just neutral platforms, to a situation where constantly, accounts are being taken offline and so forth. There's of course a lot of pressure. There's clearly a lot of commercial pressure, particularly on YouTube. The famous adpocalypse that started after advertisers' videos were found by the Wall Street Journal on Nazi content. Political pressure. And we can really see that kind of these policy elements are really becoming more and more important, right? Like what content is accepted on a platform. That for me was the photo of 2018, best photo. So here we have Jack Dorsey, CEO of Twitter, right? Being, well, accosted is maybe a bit too much, but being shouted at by Alex Jones, a famous conspiracy theorist. Behold Google Glass here, right? The Casio vintage database watch. So it's great, it's a great photo. But so this was before he got banned, Alex Jones, from Twitter. Actually, 2 days before he got banned. So here he's basically shouting at Jack Dorsey to talk about shadow banning. So there was the rumor that actually Twitter was shadow banning conservatives, meaning basically not bumping them off the platform, but giving them lower visibility. And then, of course, he got kicked from the platform, as have many other people. And this is a way that this year in the winter school at DMI, some researchers have tried to study that. So Twitter has released data sets for a number of, I think it's like 4,000 accounts connected to the Internet Research Agency. Great name for basically the Russian information services, and Iranian accounts. And you can download them, and you can, in a sense, kind of investigate those policy decisions to a degree, because those are all accounts that have been bumped. So there are kind of some real empirical elements in here. Yeah, I think some of the more like general stuff I think is hard to study, but Mark Zuckerberg in the beginning of 2018, he said, okay, we're changing how our algorithms work, right? We're going to change. We're moving away from simply, from finding relevant content to meaningful social interactions. Right? Because that's what you're having on Facebook. I'm not so sure how easily the effect of those things is to study empirically. But here's another, I think, at least in theory, another intersection between those kind of policy elements and possible outcomes. Yeah, I mean, there's more stuff happening, right? I think we see that those big companies, they're also not pumping money into certain sectors. For example, journalism, some of those really controversial areas where publishers are, of course, affected quite a bit. And we're seeing increased regulatory effort. I mean, that's part of this policy environment, right? So that's a regulation proposal by the European Commission that has already passed the Council. It's currently being discussed in the Parliament. I think it's in second or third reading. And this is going to come. This is a regulation that's gonna. Well, I'm not, and maybe I'm a bit too confident here, right? So it's maybe gonna come. But this is a regulation that focuses on two elements: transparency, and the second I think is more interesting is redress. So if you're a content creator on YouTube and suddenly your channel gets demonetized, in the future you will be able to call somebody, at least if they actually implement it. So we see that these policy questions are getting more and more important. Yeah, and final point, just 2 slides. I think it's very interesting to think about, like, more abstractly, this kind of economic environment that these platforms exist in, right? There's this notion of concentric diversification, and I think we can really see that. These big internet companies have a core where they make some money, and from there, they widen, and these competitive dynamics, I think, are kind of are very, very interesting. And here again, one can study, maybe not things automatically, but I would be very interested in actually looking at all of the ties, the links, the actual hyperlinks between different Google products. I think it would be really, really interesting. So that is again kind of another way of maybe moving from something that's a bit more conceptual to something that is a bit more empirical, right? And this is just a selection of the many products that Google has, where they've either bought the company or created their own element. And one can really ask, who are the competitors to something like YouTube? What's the are we moving towards platform wars, right? It seems that currently Amazon and is of course the owner of Twitch. Probably the best position, but Facebook, Instagram. So I think this is a level, of course, that's more abstract and more, not as instantly empirical, but I think a very interesting way to think about platform through their different positions in the market and attempts to dominate the markets. Do I have like 2 more minutes or yeah? So it's basically a summary. So what I've tried to do is talk about kind of a number of dimensions, starting indeed with this kind of normalization and standardization that allows for organization in market forms, which for me is really important. I really think that this flattening of cultural differences behind the term content, it's already such a, I wouldn't say a demeaning term, but it's really a term that that indicates already, that there's no difference between something that I'm writing to, a friend, or a journalistic article, or, content. I think really signals this flattening. Indeed, in these very large markets that emerge here, algorithmic coordination plays an important role. Right? We can study that. It's just hard to do so. And one of the things that I'm trying to push at the level of the European Commission is observability, to facilitate the observation of what happens on platforms through researchers. A third element was model-level interfaces, right? That capture participants' practices and data, and that indeed again can really inform our empirical approaches. Also, when it then comes to looking at the participants and the context, who's there, what are they doing, what are they saying, what are their relationships, and in extension, right? Who's making money? How much money are they making? I think it's important. Especially YouTube is no longer like a simply kind of amateur. It has really become a pathway towards professionalization, and a lot of those people that are now being criticized, extreme right channels, they make a living of YouTube, right? And that's, I think, is a very, very important aspect. And that indeed kind of connects to the different kind of justifications and values that protect these models, right? Because that's the goal, of course, of all of this maneuvering that's currently happening around Twitter, YouTube, and so forth. And indeed, kind of the last point was kind of what's the market environment. So I think that is a bit kind of this diagram that I would like to work on, right? Those six dimensions that I think really point to a model that I think is deeply expansionist. I think it's really a model that is set up to expand further. And I think one could describe, platforms as kind of transversal network effect machines, right? That are not just, profiting from increased numbers of users, but also kind of the connections of network effect on all of those six levels. And maybe just, I do really agree with Benjamin Bratton, who says, well, a platform, it's a new techno-institutional model, right? It's not just like a normal company. There's something, it's not just capitalism as usual. There's really something happening that needs descriptions. And I think any kind of political response to those challenges that are posed by platforms, they really depend on the quality of analysis, right? So kind of making sense of all of those layers together, I think is really kind of what's required at this point in time. So thanks a lot.